Hi, this is Aaron Azrod, and welcome to the 138th episode of the Truth Island podcast. Silence is sometimes said to be the strongest form of wisdom. As the philosopher Ludwig Wittgenstein once noted, whereof one cannot speak, thereof one must be silent. What this quote suggests is that there are many truths out there in this world that will always exceed our form of verbal communication. When discussing higher order topics such as the nature of the universe and God, it is almost silly to think that such things can be described with simple words. Given also that so many of our greatest questions appear to have no solid answers, one begins to even wonder why even talk or debate anything at all if you will not end up any more wiser than before you began. Silence is not just a way of admitting that one does not know. It is also a good exercise in becoming more mindful and increasing one's capacity for listening. For example, some Buddhist monks take vows of silence in order to train their mind to weed out harmful speech. This is incredibly helpful, as if you've ever found yourself having lunch with coworkers, you'll probably have noticed that the things coming out of other people's mouths, well, aren't always the nicest. As mysterious and wise as a silent person might appear, however, it would be a mistake to assume that everyone who is quiet is wise, as sometimes people choose to keep their mouths shut not because they have nothing to say, but because they are afraid to speak up. Another moral question arises, a sin of omission, if a wise person refuses to speak when their advice may be very well needed. Joining me to cut through the silence, I am once again joined by Kenny. Kenny, do you think we can get through this entire episode in complete silence?
No, I don't think so.
That was a great answer. You know, that the 4 seconds of silence answered every question I had. So well done, sir. We've solved the great mysteries of the universe.
Oh yeah. Okay, so silence. It's well, I think you said it pretty brilliantly. I mean, silence is one of those things that has a pretty mysterious, yeah, mysterious and cool rap to it. The person with the meaningful stares, who just doesn't really say much, but he communicates so much with his eyes. It's like, yeah, it's always the coolest thing or the wise thing. It's never, but sometimes, especially like in the when it comes to like the news, when after someone has either shut up at school or done something horrible to someone else, they always say, he was always a quiet type. He was always a silent type, you know. Um, but no, I think that's it's so silence does have, it does have naturally, we kind of associate silence with wisdom and someone who understands things and someone who is careful with their words and their speech and so forth. But it could also be, as you had mentioned earlier, that a person is silent simply because they're afraid, or they have little to nothing to say, which is actually a pretty wise thing. If you don't have much, if you have anything to say, it's best to keep quiet. But there are other reasons for a person to be silent, or why a person is being silent. But in doing so, they're often perceived as wise. And that's how the old proverb goes. It says, even a fool, when he is silent, is perceived as wise.
Yes, yes. So I want to let's talk about some of the benefits of silence. I think we should talk about the benefits first, and then we can kind of talk about some of the drawbacks. So there's that old proverb, we're born with two sets of ears, but one set of
Mm,
mouth.
mm,
And from what I've noticed, silent people are highly observant, or at least some of them are, right? Because you can't help but observe in your silence, right? And I think this is a little bit at what the Buddhist monks are getting at, because when you're, in Buddhism, the idea is to kind of not only silence your mouth, but also to silence your mind. And people don't really understand what that means. They're like, okay, is the ultimate form of enlightenment some form of like comatose, where you're not thinking, you're like brain dead? And the answer is no. But the idea is like the less you're trying to compartmentalize into words, right? Like we see an event, and then like the first knee-jerk reaction is to talk about it. Like you see something like, oh my God, look at this. And that's what little children do all the time. They're like, mommy, look, why is that guy doing this? Why is they doing that? Right? They're the blah, 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 blah. Everything is being instantly converted into language, right? And that's as a result of not knowing. When you know something, you don't need to point it out. You just understand what's going on and you just internalize it. An even higher state of that is that it's not even being internalized into some kind of narrative within your mind. You're simply observing the thing, and that's it. You're not even making like, oh, well, this guy's angry as a result of the fact that he broke up with his wife 3 months ago. You're not even creating these like crazy narratives. You're simply in a state of observation. So there's you're kind of transcending language to some type of degree. And when you're trying to transcend language, both silencing your mouth and your mind, you're actually able to just observe phenomena for what they are, instead of like coding it with all of these narratives and all of these like stories that we tell ourselves.
Well, yeah, I can see that. We do like stories. The one of the, I think that is a benefit to silence. Another benefit to silence is being able to, being able not, to not have to regret the things you've said, because that's, it's almost like it's better. It's almost like it's better to have, it's almost like it's better to regret what you didn't say than it is to regret the things you've said, because you can't take back what you said, or you can't say what you haven't, So it gives you that perfect opportunity, or should I say that good opportunity to not have to go through that ordeal of
Yeah.
Beating yourself up with something dumb or silly or insensitive or unkind or whatever it may be that you said to somebody or people.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's just a game of probability. It's like the more you speak, the more chances there are for you to error. It's just a probability thing. The less you speak, the less probability there is that you're going to say something dumb, because there's just less occurrences, less frequency of you speaking. Like I sometimes think about, obviously you and I have recorded a lot of ourselves and thrown a lot of it out there. And I'm going to be honest, like I'm sure I've said some dumb stuff. Like there's no doubt about it. I'm sure if I listen to some earlier episode, I'm like, man, I don't really agree with you, Aaron. Sorry, 2020, Aaron. I don't really agree with what you're saying now here in 2021, And I'm conflicted about it, because on one hand, it's like I needed to say those things at that time in order to arrive at a higher level, or a more mature level, right? So I said those things in 2020. Again, I'm sure there's nothing I said that I'm that like, oh my God, I'm so ashamed, head down, vow of silence for the next 3 years. But I think of it and I'm like, I'm sure I've said things that are wrong or just wouldn't make sense right now, but I needed to say those things at that particular juncture, at that particular moment, so that I could learn further, evolve my understanding even further. And I don't have any like regrets about that. Like I'm not, I'm not saying like there is more probability. Like if somebody had me and they had another person who's recorded nothing, right? Well, the person who's recorded nothing is not guilty of saying anything dumb. However, they haven't necessarily said anything wise either.
Boy, I mean, yeah, I mean, I think it's fine to say those things, in the sense of, I mean, today it's almost like there are, it's almost like, you're not allowed to make mistakes, or you're not allowed to say what you think, if what you think is contrary to popular opinion. But that's how people learn often is, I mean, when people hold strong beliefs or hold dogma, strong beliefs, that's a good thing. It's because they're human beings. They've made decisions to hold certain views. But another part of humanity is we often change our minds when, it's usually privately, not publicly. Privately, we change our minds when, when we see that things, that things aren't really lining up. And making those verbal, those errors, quote unquote, or things that we say that, we end up regretting at some point, saying them, at least hopefully saying them, is not so much the trouble, because sometimes that's how we get from point A to point B. That's how we learn from gain maturity. the problem is happening. The problem is when those things these days, a person can say one thing and have their lives ruined forever. But I would say that it's in those cases, or should I say in some of those cases, those things said are quite helpful.
Yeah, I want to absolutely talk about that. So there is this idea that if I say anything at all, there's always a risk of me appearing dumb or ignorant, or I'll embarrass myself. People, first off, like, it takes, like, people don't realize this. Anyone who's afraid of speaking up, take it from me, it's really hard to get noticed. So, people think they're gonna post like one thing on Facebook and then a whole like mob is gonna descend upon them. And I'm like, no, 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 no. If you're not already quasi famous, chances are no one's even paying attention to what the hell it is that you're saying or doing. That's number one. And that's actually a really cool thing, by the way, because if you're famous, you have to be even more careful about what you say, because you have the vultures flying around you waiting for you to screw up, and then they're going to pounce on you. Whereas if you're a nobody, well, you actually get to kind of speak your mind. It's kind of in Shakespeare, like King Lear's fool. Right? If you're the fool, or you're the janitor, or with a lowly position or whatever, you can speak your mind freely, because they're like, oh, that's the janitor. No one cares what he has to say. But he actually gets to speak the most free. He speaks the most freely because by virtue of no one really paying attention to him, he kind of gets to speak the truth in between all of the dialogue, so to speak. So that's one kind of thing you can take comfort in. Is just playing King Lear's fool. No one's really paying attention to what I'm saying. The other thing is that I think that you have to say you have to get through the foolishness in order to get through the wisdom. And if you're too scared to get through the foolishness, how are you ever going to arrive at the wisdom? Perpetually, like, there is this line, I think it's by Aristotle, I'm going to butcher it, like, a man who stands for nothing is nothing. So, like, if you never put your neck out there and say something wise or something that ends up being foolish, well, then you never really stood for anything on your time on earth. You'll get to heaven or something and be like, wow, you never said anything foolish, but you never really helped anyone. You never really benefited the world. You just kind of lived in your cave and no one even knew that you ever existed. And I don't know if that's exactly the way that we should be playing this. I would rather, like, some of our most incredible people, right? Our most incredible people have probably said foolish things, but because they say foolish things, that like, they have taken the chance so that we can hear their incredible wisdom, right? So when they say foolish things, it allows them to eventually arrive at the point where they are saying wise things. But just from a probability standpoint, there are going to just, by the roll of the dice, sometimes the things that they say are maybe not the most thought out.
Yeah, I mean, I think that a wise person's, even the folly of a wise person is better than the wisdom of a fool. In the sense of, sure, I mean, if you really, here's the thing about, I don't think anybody's above mistake or reproach. So if you really believe, or if sure, you could always make the mistake on the math equation. That's fine.
Yeah.
But if you really believe what you're saying, if you understand, if you're trying to articulate your own belief or your own understanding of the world, and you end up bumbling around and saying something you believe you shouldn't have, well, that's fine. At the end of the day, it's better that you, I would say, spoke the truth about what you believed. Yeah, it's. I think it's better. I would say that it's better. It's better. But one might even argue that, okay, well, I guess it depends on the kind of person you're. Right? Are you a public figure who needs to say these things, or are you just like us, the everyday man who has no business, nobody's listening to him, so why? What's your deal? Grab a McDonald's and shut up and eat like the rest of us. So the point is, I would say that there's a place for both.
Me like ESPN. Me like ESPN.
Me like ESPN. ESPN, good. Yeah. So I think it's I think there's a place for both. There's a place for the person who, like Jordan Peterson's situation, is most likely he's a very public figure, But he's a very well thought out man. So if he and even if he does bumble around, I'm sure that he's the kind of person just like is, who, not that I know him personally, but I can infer from his, previous his interviews and talks and all that, that he'll own up to his nonsense. While there's a place where people unlike him, but who are as wise or who has as understanding, just could refrain from saying anything at all, because
Yes.
not only do they believe that nobody's listening, but they don't believe it's almost like beating a brick wall with a feather. It's just not, you're not really the powerhouse to take these things on.
Okay, I want to actually talk about that bear trap for a second. So I think when people speak, they have this imaginary bear trap in their mind. Like, uh-oh, if I say this wrong thing, I'm going to get caught in the bear trap. Like, I'm going to be very honest. Like, when I'm editing my podcast episodes, there is a little voice of me in my head saying, uh-oh, is this a bear trap or whatever? But I've noticed that, like, I really need to silence that voice more often, because it's really the voice of fear, right? Because I think that the voice of fear can sometimes prevent us from getting to the voice of truth, right? Because I did a podcast episode with my friend Joe, several months ago, and we talked about why don't we see more high-powered debates between like super intellectuals, like fighting each other, like why, like it's always some guy talking on their own platform or whatever. You think of like Fox News or CNN, they're never really debating one another. They're just talking in their little echo chamber to the specific audience. And you say to yourself, you scratch your head and say, well, why exactly is this the case? It's because they're all afraid of appearing foolish, right? They are absolutely frightened that if they were locking horns with someone of equal intellectual caliber, they would get caught in a bear trap. And then they would say, oh my God, I'm stuck in this bear trap, and now my career is over. No one's ever going to listen to me again. Like, I'm going to be so publicly humiliated and spanked that no one will ever listen to my words ever, ever, ever again. And
Mm.
what this prevents is that it actually prevents humanity from arriving at higher truth. Our fear of falling into a bear trap actually prevents us from saying foolish things and then growing into like higher versions of ourselves.
Well, there's, like I said, I think that's right, because some people just they need to say those things in order to arrive at a different conclusion, and some people need to say them so that they can fully understand the weight of what they're saying. But we're living in a world where that's just not possible, because the things you say now are, well, traps. They will either come by. I heard recently, I forget who it was. I don't know if it was Kevin Hart, but somebody had um, come under fire for something they had tweeted many years ago.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, well, that makes no sense. That's like a father spanking, or it's actually worse than that, because you have no authority over the person, and you never had authority over the person. But I'll continue. It's like a father spanking a child, in his 30s, when he finds out the boy took a cookie when he was 5. Yeah, Dad, remember that one cookie you said I shouldn't take? Well, I took it. I'm sorry. Like, okay, now, when are you gonna get spanked, son? It's like, okay, what the? It's silly, because you don't, especially when you're not, a policing authority. This is not the jungle. This is not the jungles of Madagascar. So we can't go around, punishing punishing one another um, for things we deem wrong. That's why the law is there. But the most people get in trouble these days for the things they say, and so people are very afraid to say things. And that's why, if you really pay attention, everybody sounds the same. All artists sound the same these days. News anchors sound the same. Even Fox News, with all their pomp and glory, still have certain things that they just can't say. Now, at the end of the day, people are starting to lose their individuality, starting to lose their own language, their own speech patterns, their own minds, and molding themselves into this, um, okay, everybody take it easy kind of speech, you know?
I'm getting I'm getting slightly worried. I wasn't so worried about this in 2016, 17, 18, 19,
What's
but
that?
and that's obviously cancel culture. I try not to be too political on this podcast, but I feel like this is an issue that we really need to kind of address in the sense that if we silence speech, right? If we silence it, we're
Mm,
denying people the roots of like we're denying them the seeds of growth. And that's the
mm,
thing that kind of scares me the most, right? Now,
mm,
if somebody is saying something like hateful or whatever, okay, it's another type of category of speech. But if someone says something that's just unwise or dumb,
mm,
if we don't allow them to kind of just ask that question or kind of articulate that thought, then they'll never grow because
mm.
they'll just be silent and afraid, and they'll never see where it is that leads. And I'll give you an example of this. Let's just say, for example, I believe in aliens. Okay, let's just pretend for a moment that's a thought of mine, that I pretend that I believe in aliens, right?
Sure,
If
sure we will.
right
Let's
now.
pretend.
Now, if I never get to like express that point of view, right? If I
Yeah.
never actually get to go out into the public forum and say that, well, then I can never exactly follow that thought to its natural terminus, right? So like maybe I believe in aliens, but I come across this really awesome scientist who just puts me in my place. And I'm like, man, I can see why my thinking was a bit fuzzy. Like I've arrived at that level. But if I'm silenced, I never get to actually reach the terminus or the end point in which I realize that the ideas that I had were foolish. That's the nature of free discussion, is because if you have bad ideas, you put them to the test, and then they either get validated or they get rejected. But if you're silenced, you never actually have that opportunity to do that. And you never get to actually realize if the thoughts in your head are genius or if they're just like utter complete nonsense.
Well, of course, I mean, I think you can because you don't necessarily have to go around, saying those ideas before you know they're silly or before you know that they are or genius or not. This is why it's super important for us to have our own, I mean, how do I our own thinking lives in the sense of we actually scrutinize what we think. Because if you already, let's just say you spent the first few minutes of your life, sorry, of the morning, thinking about what you were going to say at a certain speech, and you found out, you said, whoa, this is a bit too this is just not good, this is just not great, and you scratched it off. Well, congratulations, you're a wise man, you figured it out before somebody had to tell you. And you didn't go through the embarrassments of experiencing the awkward silences or whatever the hell would have happened. But I think you're right still, in the sense of, yes, it's not a very good thing. And wherever there is fear, human beings just don't thrive. There's not a Fear has to do more with survival than it does with thriving. And what happens is there is a certain kind of, and this is, it's not just that, because there's a philosophical problem as well as I wouldn't say, there's a philosophical problem as well as a national problem. Yeah, because this is the United States of America. It's one of the greatest nations ever, and the foundation of this country is one of those things. It's being able to say freely what one is thinking, even if it is in fact hateful, unkind, and wicked. Who gives a damn? You have, as you not, there's no, nobody has natural rights, but you do have national rights. And this is what separates America from a lot of other nations. So this is the one place that people can say what they want to say. And they could for a very long time say what they want to say. And well, if you agree with them, you stand up and you clap. If you don't, you say, nope, I don't. And you might chuck a tomato or two. But the point is simply, it's a dangerous, not dangerous, it's not even dangerous. It's childish. But when adults start behaving like children, that's when it gets dangerous, because we can actually drive.
I like what you're saying, and I want to maybe frame it in a slightly different way, but I like the sentiment. So imagine you
Mm.
are a silent type and you
Ooh.
try and arrive at all the answers internally, right? You're like, well, I'm going to figure it all out on my own, right? And there is, to play devil's advocate with that a little bit though,
Mm.
you are ascribing supreme importance to your own ego. You're like, well, if I can't figure it out, then no one else can. Whereas maybe you're just at a coffee shop and you express your viewpoints, and somebody else who's had an alternative life than you, right? They've
Mm.
had a different set of experiences. They're able to poke a hole that never in a million years you would have arrived at yourself. That's why this is why I love reading books so much, because there's only so much truth that I'm going to discover in my own life, right? Like, for example, I have never fought in war. So I'll never know what that truth is. I'll never know what the truth of fighting in war is because I've never actually participated in that myself. But if I
Mm.
read a book or I speak to a veteran, they can bring me a truth that I myself, throughout the course of my natural life, will never come across. And there's a beautiful thing in that. And that means that you do have to kind of sacrifice your own ego a bit and say, hey, there are people that have lived experiences that are radically different than that of my own, and they might be able to bring some truth to the table that there's no way, left to my own devices, I'll be able to discover.
No, I think that makes sense. It's not a matter of thinking that one can figure everything out on his own, but doing one's best to figure out what you can figure out. And the rest, well, the rest is the rest, you know. It's not, this is one of those things that, I don't think people should. So for the person who's trying to figure things out, shouldn't take it, they shouldn't take it too seriously, because at the end of the day, it's taking things like this too seriously, that those kinds of impulses that turns that makes us, how you say, very, well, not just unpleasant to be around, but well, then, yeah, the ego, that's where the ego comes in. So it's a matter of doing the best you can, and understanding it. I mean, not sort of not understanding, but doing the best you can, and finding out what you can, while at the same time knowing that what you can't catch, that's what your mates are there for, that's what books are there for, that's what films are there for, that's what conversations are there for, and so forth. So yeah, absolutely, I think you're right.
Okay, I want to put two theoretical people against each other, and I want to hear what you have to say about this. Okay.
Okay.
All right. In the left corner, we
Yeah.
have in the left corner we've got Super Wizard Monk, who never talks.
Super Wizard Monk.
We got
Ooh.
Super Wizard Monk, and he has just taken a vow of silence, and he only listens. He only listens, highly precocious, highly observant, just observes the world around him, doesn't
Ooh.
say anything, just everything
Really?
goes in. He sees the nature of man, sees the nature of the animal kingdom. Everything is just an observation to him, and he doesn't actually pass any judgment on it. Okay? That's in
Yeah.
the left corner. In the right corner, we have a guy who he doesn't go blah 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 blah. Like, he's not crazy, right? But he does speak a lot, and he
It's
does,
so dab.
yeah, and he does quite often say some foolish stuff. He says some
Mm.
foolish stuff here and there. However,
Mm.
when it's pointed out that he says foolish stuff, he
Mm.
reflects on it and he changes his opinion. Who do you think is wiser, Silent Wizard Monk, or a guy who talks, says foolish stuff from time to time, but reflects upon it?
Okay, well, based on the constraints you've given me a lot of constraints, Aaron.
I
Yeah,
got
based
you.
on
I got you tied down to a chair, man. Super
the
binary right now.
Would you like this super awesome donut
Yeah,
or
it's
this
it's it's
happy
going to be
apple?
clam chowder or clam chowder.
No, so I think it's the other bollocks. The guy who's just a chatting guy who has at least enough self-awareness to say, well, I couldn't possibly know how wise the monk is. So it's kind of like, is it Schrodinger's cat? The cat is both dead and alive. So the monk is both ridiculously dumb and ridiculously wise at the same time. So I can't.
It's
And
like
I
that.
can't bank.
I'm thinking of that show. I don't know if you ever saw it, The Good Place, where there's this character. He's like a monk, and for like the first season, he's completely silent,
Yes,
and then he starts opening his mouth, and he's incredibly dumb, right?
he's incredible, brilliant. That's exactly, yes, that's exactly what it's like. It's like when he's silent, he's both and, like, uh, but at least this other guy, I know what I'm dealing with. So I'm gonna take the other guy, like the um the Gabby, the gift of Gab.
But I think you've put but it is like Schrodinger's cat, because you're right. There is that possibility that that silent monk knows something that no one else knows. That
Yeah,
you
possibly.
actually threw a nice monkey wrench into my example. Well done. So like that silent monk dude might know something that the rest of us mortals don't know. That there is that possibility. I think for us average mortals, though, I think this ugly, messy process of trial and error is the closest we're ever going to get. And here's why. I think that, just as I said earlier, we kind of have to weigh our personal experiences with that of other people. And a really good example of this is like if you even take Siddhartha, the Buddha, for example, right? In his early days, he grew up in his father's palace. He saw no sickness. He saw no starvation. He saw no like poverty. He saw none of these things. If Sid Arthur had just left his view of the world to his own eyes, to what he had seen, to what he had heard, he would have a very, 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 very limited concept of reality, right? And it would be a completely, in a way, it would actually be a very narcissistic, egocentric view of reality. It's like whatever I see and whatever I hear is all that there is. It's not until you actually get into these messy verbal fisticuffs that you actually get to, your reality begins to bend based upon what other people are saying. And you roll around in the mud and you look very foolish. But I think that's kind of like the joy of life in a way.
Yeah, there's a quote that I like: all actual life is encounter. So all life is meeting, in the sense of,
Who said that?
um, this is a guy named Martin Buber.
Nice.
I think he's a German guy. Not entirely sure, what he did or does. He's probably dead now, dead. But I think you're right. It's about encountering other people and finding out and seeing. That's how we kind of. That's how we all learn. We bang our heads into the tree, and we say, okay, I just encountered the tree. It's there. That's what's there right now. Kids encounter, that's what, always using your little greasy little paws, trying to touch everything. They're trying to meet those things. They're trying to, extend themselves towards those things. And then growing up, they lean on their parents to explain things. When they meet new strangers, they're always pointing rudely at them and saying, "Who's that, mommy?" Well, yeah, it's a stranger, honey. But the no, I think you're right. I think it's not necessarily, it doesn't necessarily have to be egotistical, but it's not really the best way to go about life. Some
Mm,
people just don't have, how you say, I don't want to make excuses for people, but I know that life is not easy. I know that.
yeah.
And some people just don't have the ease, to be around other people, or the privilege of having, close friends and stuff like that. So it's kind of strange. But some of them are just very, self-centered, egotistical bastards who just don't want to be around anybody.
I love that quote. Can you say it again with the encounter? It was a really good quote. Like life is encounters.
Oh yes, all actual life is encounter.
Okay. That quote actually reminds me of something that the great philosopher Joe Rogan once said. and and he said that the
He
reason,
is, man.
yeah, he is. He is a smart guy. I love
Mhm.
Joe Rogan. He said something interesting, that it's like with jujitsu, for example, you have
Mm.
all of these like tough guys who will walk into the dojo, and they think they're like some kind of god. They think they're invincible. They flex their big ass bicep, and they think that they're remarkable. But then when they actually start rolling with someone on their ground and they get their ass kicked, only then does wisdom like begin, right? It's only when you're stripped down of your clothes and you're no longer your god complex is completely stripped down that you can actually start learning something, right? Because let's just say I live in my apartment and I think that I have all of the answers. I think I have all of the answers. I know everything that there is to know. Well, how do I know that until I actually practice verbal jujitsu with somebody and get stripped down
Yeah.
and my holes are exposed?
Well, you don't even have to go that far. So human beings are very interesting, and this happens to all of us. Eventually, we think that we are, invulnerable and, amazing, but that's fine. That's fine. But let me put something in perspective for you, humans. You know that person who walks into the gym, or the ring, flexing his muscles and being all tough, or the woman who thinks she's the most beautiful thing since Cleopatra. Let me tell you this. At some points in your life, actually once a day, every day, you know, all your life, you have gone to a porcelain bowl, sat down, and squeezed for dear life, squeezed brown goop out of your butthole. And that's the image. That's you. That's you know what I mean? Like that's what you've done. Okay. So don't come here acting like you walk on water. You don't, because we all poop. At the end of the day, all human beings are connected by one unkind reality. We all take dumps, and it is shameful. We all look ridiculous doing it. No one is above it, and it's it's a good reminder next time you think you're God that you poop.
As ludicrous as that sounds, you're absolutely correct. I think that so I'm kind of torn between two things, and I think we might be sort of spiraling into another discussion altogether. But there's this idea of solitude versus socialization at play here,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
Okay. Now, there's two types of people, like there's two extremes of this, and both are equally dangerous. The first is our holy monk who thinks that he is special. He thinks that he's like a god. He thinks that he doesn't poop when he really does poop, and he lives
Yes.
completely alone, and he thinks that he's invincible, and he thinks he has access to pure divine genius. Okay, that's one end of the spectrum. But then we have examples of people in our society who are overly socialized, and
Mm.
you usually find these types of people in corporations, right? Because every time they're like, are you guys getting lunch? Are you going to Chipotle? Let me go ahead and sit down. Right? Like they're what I call the overly socialized types, because they actually don't have an inner citadel. They don't have any quiet solitude. They don't have any reflection time. They're just constantly bending to the knee of the people around them. And I think that both of these extremes are highly dangerous. The super solitude guy who thinks he's God, highly dangerous, right? Because he's not actually wrestling with anyone in the ring. But I think the overly socialized type just accepts whatever the majority of people are saying around him. He accepts that to be absolute truth. So if the majority of his coworkers say something, he just accepts that that's true and doesn't really put up that much of a fight, because he thinks that he's so insignificant that the group must always be correct. And who is he to dare challenge what Ted in marketing is telling him, right? I think both of those extremes are highly dangerous, because you're not really seeing reality for what it is.
Well, I think, yeah, they're both antisocial behaviors in the sense of one is extra, one thinks, being alone, well, it's antisocial, just not being there, period. While the other one, while the other one is being a little bit too friendly, too social. And because of that, people don't really want to be around that person, or they actually, they're not really there. It's almost like they're just they're like what's that thing called, Play-Doh. they take the shape and form of any social group they're in.
Or they have no backbone. They have no
No
spine.
backbone. Yeah,
Yeah.
no spine. So they're molded, they're moldable. And so what happens is at the end of the day, they're not really being individuals. They're just clumps of flesh that are there to repeat the right things or to affirm the right things and to push away the wrong things and whatever it is that that group is for, they're for it. And if whatever that group is not for it, it's not for it. He or she is not for it. So um, but you find these kinds of people anywhere, everywhere. One of the best ways to deal with things like this, or should I don't know if people really do things try to fix this, because whenever people are like either one of these, they really like to some extent they enjoy being that thing until it's unbearable. But I like when you said earlier about the person not having any social, the second person not having any, alone time to figure out who the hell they actually are, while the other person has a little bit too much alone time and doesn't have an opportunity or to express, love and kindness and the good things that humans need.
Because I think that in my 20s, I may have been a little bit too overly socialized, right? And like, I was a bit more dependent on what my coworkers thought of me. I was a little bit more dependent on what friends thought of me. So I would say that I was leaning more in the over socialized direction. And we as humans are very black and white, so we tend to overcorrect things. So
Oh
like,
my
okay,
God,
right,
yes.
right, yeah, we always, so then that would be followed by like, months of solitude or whatever, or whatever it is, as close as I could get it. So it's a very difficult juggling act to get that perfect balance of like, okay, I might be starting to go off here on the deep end. I gotta anchor myself with some humans, right? I gotta anchor myself, like I'm a balloon right now. I need to anchor myself to the ground a little bit here. But if gravity is becoming a little too fierce, well then I need to let go of fly away a little bit. So it's something that we have to just be very mindful of all times. We have to ask ourselves, am I being too socialized right now? Am I speaking without thinking? I think that's like the first thing. Like if this was a disease of sorts, like the first symptom would be speaking without thinking. I think if you're becoming over socialized, that's the first thing. There's not even a pause in what it is that you're saying. You're just spurting it out. And again, I think that if you're spending too much time alone, then you might also
Mm,
want to ask yourself another set of questions of like, when was the last time I got a burger with some friends? Like it could be something as simple as that. And it's difficult because we as humans love extremes. We suck. We absolutely suck at maintaining proper balance.
yes. Yes. Yes, we do, don't we?
um,
Um,
yeah, I think one last thing I wanted to say before we close out here.
Zata?
Um, so I think the last advice that we need to give is I think we need to, and I think we did this throughout the episode, is dispel the myth of the wise silent monk. Like I think that is something that is more mythology than it is actual reality.
Mm,
But at the same time, I think we need to remind people of the dangers of becoming over socialized. Like I think that they're like each can kind of learn from one another because what you described is equally as dangerous as the silent monk. Whereas all speech starts to sound identical. And that's highly dangerous. And the reason that all speech starts to sound identical is because you're hanging around people too much. It's like the ultimate form of collectivism, where it's like your speech is no different than Comrade Bob's speech over here.
yes.
And that's extremely dangerous as well. So, as to whether silence is wisdom, I think it's selective silence that is the true wisdom, like knowing when to be silent and then knowing when to speak.
Yeah, I mean, wisdom is wisdom, and silence is and wisdom is sometimes expressed in silence.
Yeah.
But silence is just silence on its own. It doesn't really mean much.
because there's also the other thing is that there's also a giant sin of omission that's going on, because let's say you're hanging around people and they're speaking they're espousing incredibly dangerous ideas. If you just stay silent, you're also committing a sin of omission, right? You're allowed, there might be something terrible that's going on.
Aaron, what do you want us to do? You want us to get up and fight 10 people about have you ever been in a place where there's like 5 or 10 people talking about one thing that you know is crazy talk? You just know it's crazy talk, you know?
Yeah.
And it's and I mean, what are you gonna do? What's the point? I mean, I what are you gonna do in a situation like that? You know, it's not always so. I don't think it's always so simple to challenge ideas. Like if it's a proper debate, absolutely, please.
Yeah.
But if you're dealing with a group of people who think fundamentally different thoughts than you do, and feel fundamentally different, different feelings about certain topics or people than you do, it's ridiculously difficult to challenge them in that moment. And the question now is even if, and let's say in spite of the difficulty, is it the right thing to do? Do you catch me drift?
Yeah, I hear you on this, and I'm going to use a rather extreme example. And
Ooh, I do like those.
yeah, and it's, I've visited both the Holocaust Museum in New York and in Israel, and they said that the biggest reason for the Holocaust was silence. Like, it was just absolute silence and just submissiveness to that. Now, again, I'm going in the most extreme direction, and if some guy went against like 50 Nazis and said, "Hey guys, I don't really think this is a really good idea," right? Like, it would be game over for them. But there's this good argument to be made that before it gets to that extreme level, you gotta start speaking up. You gotta start speaking up, and you gotta start fighting these very negative and pernicious ideas before they actually have a foothold in society. And I think that's incredibly wise knowledge that we have to take with us. So if I'm sitting at a table with 10 people who disagree with me, and there's nothing that I can say or do to change their mind, one might argue, man, that's an exercise in futility, Aaron. You're arguing with indoctrinated people, and nothing you say or do is going to change their mind. But maybe I need to speak up in a different forum, or maybe I need to speak up in a different arena with other like-minded people, so we can kind of combat that sort of pernicious thought before it actually.
I see what you mean. That makes sense. Yes. Yes, absolutely. No, because if you think about what's his name? Churchill was totally against
fascism
from the very beginning. I mean, he could smell the trouble coming miles away, but no one listened to him. And so, well, that's a different story.
Right. So I think that, like, we don't have, sometimes in life, we don't have the luxury of playing the role of the wise silent type, because if we just stay silent, well, then an atrocity might actually occur. I'm not saying that that's the case right now, but it has a way of just creeping up on you. It does have this magical way of just creeping on you. And the same example applies in like Stalinist Russia. Again, like, Stalin wasn't a big bad wolf right away. Like, he didn't become like the big bad wolf immediately. It just constantly, oh, they're not saying anything, I'm going to push my luck a little further. Oh, they're not saying anything, I'm going to push a little harder and a little harder and a little harder and a little harder. And then before you know it, now you really can't speak up.
It's not like you're dealing with, it's not like you're dealing with, with the silent wise types in Stalin's Russia. I would say that these situations, even with the Germans, these situations were very, being the wise silent type all the time it's not like that stops being wise. It's like there's a time for these things. There's a time to speak up, and there's a time. Thank you, Proverbs. In Proverbs, it goes like this: that there's a time to speak up and there's a time to remain silent. There's a time to embrace and a time to refrain from embracing. There's a time to gather stones and a time to cast away your stones. The point is simply that there's a balance. it's the wise man who can understand when it's time to do the right thing, and and what that right thing may be. Um, so I think you're right. The silence, the whole silent monk treatments for all, forever, it's not really the way to go, because it seems to lack so much, well, common sense. And it seems to it seems to lose wisdom in doing so.
How about this other idea? I have one other idea before we close
Yeah.
out, because we are approaching the hour mark. And this is an idea that I have, and I espoused it in a meetup a long time ago. And I have this idea called polite friction. Okay, polite friction. And let's just say I'm talking with 10 people, totally indoctrinated, totally drinking the Kool-Aid. Maybe there's like a way I can communicate with them through polite questioning, like, would you mind telling me how that works? Or what happens if the guy does this? Or is it possible that that happens? And you're right, maybe these folks are, completely indoctrinated. But I think also applying some polite friction of like, oh, that's interesting, or how to at least you've planted a seed. Like they're not going to bow down and get on one knee and say, "You have changed my mind, good sir." But you've
No.
planted a little invisible seed of doubt in their ideology. So this is another tactic that I don't see being used at all. I see two heavyweight fighters slugging it out and no one changing their mind. But maybe this idea of polite friction, just polite
Yes.
like questioning and just like, oh, okay, yeah, I'm a little confused, but I see what you're saying or whatever, might be the way to go. And I think we need a lot more of that kind of discussion in our discourse as well.
Oh, I think that makes sense. There's nothing like getting someone to answer answer questions they themselves have been terrified to ask.
Yes. Yes. But it has to be done with tact, it has to be done with
Yes,
tact and
that's
and
true.
and done in a way of like, I'm not like, I think people are so afraid of being embarrassed. I think that's what they fear above all else. And if you say something in such an aggressive way that it's going to
Embarrassed.
cause that person humiliation, you're going to lose. No, even if you're right, you're going to lose. So you
Yeah.
have to do it in such a way where their ego is still left intact, but you've planted some seeds of doubt that you'll never, and it's kind of like planting a tree that you'll never see to grow to full age, right? You'll be long dead, but that you plant that seed and then that tree eventually grows into a full tree for further generations to enjoy. It's the same thing with polite friction. You plant a seed and you never get to reap the rewards of seeing that person fully change their mind and become fully converted. But maybe
Mm.
after you're long gone, or months or years later, those seeds of doubt that you planted eventually spring up, and it completely dismantles and destroys the entire ideology.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, Kenny, I know we weren't silent, but I think we needed some words in order to solve this problem. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you so much for having me, Aaron.
This concludes the 138th episode of the Truth Island podcast. I'm Aaron Azrod.